Joining us now is retired US Army Colonel Jeffrey McCausland, a national security consultant, visiting professor at Dickinson College. Colonel, thank you very much for being with us.
John, it's great to be with you.
Okay, well, much of the focus has been on this contradiction between Milley's own view about a residual force in Afghanistan and what the president told ABC News, that no senior military commander had recommended against a full troop withdrawal. There is testimony, though, from Milley that the status quo of relative calm in Afghanistan in recent years was about to end. He told the committee, on the 1st of September, we were going to go to war again with the Taliban. Of that, there was no doubt. The White House press secretary also on Tuesday tweeted this out. The president told ABC News advice was split, but consensus of top military advisors was 2,500 troops staying meant escalation due to the deal by the previous administration. Does that provide enough context here? Does that take some of the gotcha moment out of Milley's testimony regarding the residual force and any differences with Joe Biden?
I think it does to a degree as far as certainly the senior military leadership. Obviously, the president seemed pretty adamant that there was no one who was opposed his logic of pulling the troops out, and no one was arguing for a residual force. So there seems to be a little bit of a difference right there. Again, the White House has attempted to cover that up, as you rightly point out, by saying that there was a consensus. And when the White House press secretary was pressed about this, she went on to say, she wasn't going to reveal names of those who agreed with the president as opposed to General Milley, and apparently also General McKenzie, the CENTCOM commander, who was also in those hearings today, also seemed to recommend that 2,500 force stay on. But as again, John, you're right as well, that all those people there today seem to agree that without question, if we'd stayed beyond 1 September, then the Taliban would have recommenced attacks on our forces. We would have had to reinforce those forces, would have been taking casualties from that moment on.
And just to that point, if there had been this residual force of 2,500 US troops beyond September 1st, ultimately that number would have to increase.
It would have to increase without question, and certainly it would be very, very difficult depending on when that force was deployed, because, of course, by the latter part of August, we basically controlled only the Kabul International Airport. So bringing a force in under fire, trying to take control back once again of Kabul would have been a major, major military undertaking, a lot of fighting there in Kabul, which resulted on large-scale casualties on both sides, as well as large-scale casualties for our NATO allies, because they had forces there as well.
Much of the criticism of Milley, especially from Republicans, seems to center on this idea that he should have resigned when it became obvious that the president decided not to follow what he truly believed, which was leaving behind this residual force. Here's part of his answer when a Republican senator asked him quite bluntly, why haven't you resigned? Here's General Milley.
Just from a personal standpoint, my dad didn't get a choice to resign at Iwo Jima, and those kids that are at Abbey Gate, they don't get a choice to resign. And I'm not going to turn my back on them. I'm not going to resign. They can't resign, so I'm not going to resign. There's no way. If the orders are illegal, we're in a different place. But if the orders are legal from civilian authority, I intend to carry them out.
In other words, it's simply stating out what the chain of command here is. There is the commander-in-chief who makes the final decision.
Exactly right. And I thought in many ways what General Milley did there on TV today was actually teach a civics lesson and the importance of civil-military relations and civil control of the military to a bunch of senators, which was a little bit surprising, to say the very least. Underscoring the point, for our country at least, civil control of the military is a bedrock of our democracy. And again, a president of the United States takes that military advice from the senior military leadership, but then he, or someday she, has to make that make that final decision. And I can tell you, all my time in Iraq and Afghanistan and all the briefings I ever sat in on, all of them emphasized, as far as our strategy for either place, Afghanistan in particular, was the integration of the military component, certainly, but economics, diplomacy, politics, information. And the president has got to weigh all those things, as well as that military advice. But obviously, if generals resign every time their advice is not taken, we're going to rotate through generals pretty quickly. And that will be the end of civil control of the military and an absolute politicization of our senior military leadership.
I guess the problem that many Republicans have, though, with Milley is that he was willing to follow to the letter orders from Joe Biden, but months earlier, he, in their view, actively tried to undermine President Trump by inserting himself into the chain of command for a nuclear strike. He spoke with his Chinese counterpart, that kind of stuff. Is there an argument here, or are they sort of comparing apples and oranges in this case?
I really don't think there's any argument here. I worked in the Pentagon, I worked on the National Security Council staff in the White House, and I can tell you that contact between people at all levels with foreign governments, friendly and adversaries, is fairly routine, particularly in a crisis. And this was a unique situation. There was intelligence. General Milley talked about that the Chinese had a belief that we might well attack them during this very turbulent period of this transition. And what he was doing was calling his counterpart. Oh, by the way, there are memorandums of agreement between the Department of Defense and the Chinese on how this all is done to reassure them that that type of an attack was not about to occur, and if you will, defuse a potential crisis. And he went on in great detail as well, John, to point out to everybody at that hearing that he did that with the full knowledge of that then Secretary of Defense Esper, subsequently acting Secretary of Defense Miller, Secretary of State Pompeo, as well as Chief of Staff McCarthy in the White House. All those players and numerous other people were aware of all this. Some 13 people listened to the call, and therefore, I think in many ways, Milley was doing his job and averting a potential crisis based on misunderstanding and miscommunications with the Chinese, who were very uneasy at that particular moment.
Colonel, thank you. Colonel Jeffrey McCausland there. We appreciate your time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.